Hello, you're listening to A Conversation With. My name is Jason, and each week I'm joined by a guest and we have a conversation on a topic of their choice. So let's meet this week's guest. Well, this week we're joined by the host of the podcast, The Ranked List of Everything. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Harry, and like your host has said, I host another podcast called The Ranked List of Everything, where we set out to rank literally everything in the world. Your host has in fact been on it, and we had a blast of a time, if you don't mind me saying.
Well, I don't mind you saying, and I'm sure they wouldn't either. So each week we're joined by different guests. We just have a conversation about a topic. So please, Harry, tell us your topic.
Well, my topic today is something that I've long been quite passionate about and have only gotten more and more into as I've grown older and older. It is in fact Marvel Comics.
Wow, so are we going to be talking about the comics themselves? Are we talking about the comics and the movies and the whole company? Are we speaking specifically the fictional universe? What do you want to talk about?
Well, now, MCU and Marvel Comics are two things which I love both of, but I feel like it would be doing them a disservice to lump them into one category. So I think I'm going to stick just to Marvel Comics, you know, when they ran from 1939 right through to the present day. We're talking purely comic book.
So what is it about Marvel Comics that you find so appealing?
Well, ever since, Marvel Comics started in 1939, and it was originally called Timely Comics. They didn't actually become Marvel Comics until 1961, in what we like to call the Silver Age of Comics. And this is when all of these amazing characters started getting introduced by Marvel, such as Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, Thor, there we go, Iron Man, Hulk, Captain America, although he was introduced in the 1930s, Daredevil, Black Panther, all of these amazing characters. And just what made this so amazing is that they were normal people. They weren't these amazing role models. They were just normal people who suddenly had something happen to them and they became superheroes, but still were superheroes with everyday problems. Like Spider-Man got bitten by a radioactive spider and suddenly he can fight crime and has super strength, but he still needs to graduate and he still has girl problem. These characters were just so relatable.
Yeah. So do you have a favorite character?
Okay. I didn't know if you were going to ask this question this early on. Can I put down 3?
Well, I can't stop you, so yeah, go ahead.
I can't even do my top 3. Can I do my top 4? They're all tied.
Is it the Fantastic Four?
It isn't the Fantastic Four. None of the Fantastic Four, actually.
No. Okay, give us your top 4, because I also hate being asked top 4. So, yeah.
Well, the first one's probably got to be Spider-Man. Of course, he is the greatest superhero of all time. I'm sorry to say, but I'm afraid he is. Another one I love is Iron Fist. I don't know if you know much about Iron Fist.
Danny Rand.
Yep, Danny Rand. Another one is Doctor Doom.
Really?
Yep, the greatest comic book villain of all time, I'm afraid to say. And my fourth one is Squirrel Girl.
All right, okay.
Love some Squirrel Girl.
So you've been following the very highly acclaimed run that's...
do you mean Infamous Iron Man?
No, for the Squirrel Girl. Was that not...
Yes, Squirrel Girl, I absolutely have, by Erica Henderson and Ryan Norton. It's an absolutely fantastic book, fantastic for genuinely all ages, just as much fun as it is for kids as it is for adults. It's just pure joy to read, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting that you pick comic books because, again, being a kind of language-based podcast in the first place, I always found comic books were an interesting thing to try to read in another language because you are reading mostly dialogue.
Yeah,
it doesn't always translate well to the world we live in, but it's nice to actually read what people are saying. You're going to pick up phrases and things that are quite useful. So I've always found
absolutely.
I remember trying to read a comic book in Italian. Wasn't as much fun as reading it in English, but no, it was Daredevil actually. So.
Oh really?
Yeah.
I always find that I often learn new words when reading comic books because comic book writers, they do like to show off. They do like to say, "Oh, look at this English degree that I had, and I know these words and how to use these words in the correct context." So a lot of the time, I am sort of reading a word and going, "Okay, what does that mean?" And it is true. I mean, that like they like to introduce dialogue so that characters talk in ways that you feel like real people would talk, which is how you can tell a good comic book from a bad comic book. And luckily, a lot of them are quite good, thankfully. But it is a good way to pick up phrases on, I believe.
So we've asked you your favourite characters, or your favourite character. We got 4, which was a surprise. What about, are there any characters you kind of... I want to say that you don't like, but I want to be more specific, because there are probably a lot of characters you don't like. But let's say a character that is very popular, that other people like, but you don't like.
I'm going to give you 2, and I'm going to get a big sigh from anyone listening. It's Venom and Deadpool.
Ah, interesting.
These are just 2 characters which I can appreciate for what they are, but I felt never deserved the amount of popularity that they gained over other characters. You know?
Yeah, I do know.
I mean, Deadpool is he's one of the most popular superheroes, and he basically amounts to a parody character, is what he essentially is.
Do you find that makes it difficult for you to justify liking comic books when people that maybe don't know comic books, that's kind of what they see as an example of a comic book character?
Well, it absolutely does. And another thing is that people don't really know how to get into comic books anymore, which I find is the way a lot of people look at it from the outside. They feel like they're on the outside looking in, because there are so many comics at the moment, and every comic you read, it feels like you're jumping into the middle of a story. Whereas if you picked up a book in the 70s or 80s, every single story would be a story on its own. But now if you pick up a book, it'll be, oh, this is part 5 of a 89-part issue, but you must have read the first 6 volumes first, otherwise you won't understand this. And I do find that very frustrating. And it's things like that, and people assuming that the movie characters are all there is to these comic books. Yeah, it does get a different view from the outside, I do feel.
Do you feel that's in part, I'm sure people have seen maybe like The Simpsons, and you've got that comic book guy and the way he kind of treats his customers. And do you feel there's any truth in that kind of situation when people go to maybe their local comic book shop?
I think that a comic book guy from The Simpsons can often be an accurate depiction of people who buy and sell comic books for a living. Because a lot of the people who buy and sell comic books for a living, I don't want to say all of them, but a lot of the people buying comic books for a living are the stereotypical, just sort of in the basement, never go outside, hate everything that's ever adapted, comic book guy from The Simpsons type people. And I say this from being a person who invests in comics quite heavily sometimes and has a few key issues that I'm very proud of. But a lot of the time that is, yes. But the success of the MCU, the success of things like Dark Knight from DC, means that people don't look at comic books as nerdy anymore. They see them as this cool little genre of pop culture, and people can now like feel comfortable about reading comics, which I think is fantastic. And if you do have a comic book shop local to you, you won't go in and find those people, because those people don't pick up new comic books. You will find people who are genuinely interested in reading these characters, and people who will have conversations with you.
Yeah, because I had an experience in a comic book shop.
Okay.
I say I had an experience. I observed an experience.
Right.
So I'm sure you are more than aware of Free Comic Book Day.
I'm more than aware of Free Comic Book Day, yes.
So having lived, as many of my listeners will know, having lived abroad for a number of years in non-English speaking countries, I never got to enjoy Free Comic Book Day.
Okay.
Because I couldn't go and pick up a comic in a language that I wanted to read.
No.
So when I moved back to England and I saw it advertised that where I was living there was a local comic book shop and Free Comic Book Day, I said, oh, brilliant, I'm going to go in and get some books.
Okay.
And I mean, what do you think is the point of Free Comic Book Day?
Well, the point of Free Comic Book Day is to encourage people to necessarily go out and buy these books, because they are quite expensive, being £3 or more for a single issue. It's encouraging people to pick up a book and start reading comics, get into that world.
That's what I would have thought as well. So,
oh God, okay.
Do you agree that it seems strange that people are just giving things away?
Yes.
If you go into a shop and it's like, this is free, do you just go and take everything, or are you a bit apprehensive? Maybe, is it really free? Is everything free? Do I need to buy something and I get this for free?
I think it's the British way to check about 20 times before knowing you're allowed to do something.
So I'm in the shop just looking at what's available. Okay. And I hear this woman with, I can't remember if she was with her son or her daughter, but just approach the guy at the counter and say, so how does this work? To which his reply was, he picked up one of the books, he opened it, and he said, well, you see, inside the book there are these things called letters, and when you put these letters together, they form words, and when you read the words, then they make sentences, and then that makes a story, and that's how it works.
Patronising comic book guy behind the counter.
Thought, wow.
That is awful. That is truly awful.
So it had been in something I'd never, I'd seen it, as we said, like on The Simpsons. I'd never seen this in real life, so it was quite interesting. A nice
how old
welcome
did this
back.
guy have curiosity?
He wasn't that old.
Really?
Yeah. It would have said late 20s.
Really?
Maximum early 30s, but yeah.
You see, I mean, I've never had that experience in a comic book shop. I'm very happy to say. I mean, being in London, I've got about 4 shops which are within a half-hour journey of me, whether it's by tube or something else. But every single one of those shops, the people in there are fairly young, fairly friendly. They greet you with a smile when you walk in. If you look like you're confused, they ask you which characters you're interested in, and they'll try and point you to a certain section. And if you go in there regularly enough, then they start to have conversations with you about the books that you've been reading. And it's a really, really friendly environment. I'm so sorry that you had such a bad experience in one of those, because that is so truly awful.
My experience, but
but even
got
so,
to observe somebody else's. So
it is a shame, because these people create those stereotypes.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought. I mean, I felt sorry for them,
yeah, well, I do too now.
Life goes on. So Marvel Comics is your topic, so not just comics in general. You mentioned before that you had a couple of issues that were quite special.
I do have a few issues which are quite special to me, yes.
What's an example of something that you consider quite special?
Well, one of the books which I'm very proud of having is the Fantastic Four issue 53, which is the second appearance and origin story of Black Panther, and the very first appearance of Ulysses Claw, who was the villain in Black Panther. I've got that signed by Stan Lee, very proudly displayed on my shelf here, which is one of my absolute favorite books. I also have a comic book called Power Man and Iron Fist issue 79, which features 2 of my favorite characters in what is essentially a Doctor Who story, which is just brilliant. It's one that my dad picked up when he was my age, and he kept it ever since. So that is one which is truly special to me, and like I'm never letting go of. And it's stuff like that comic books, especially Marvel comics, because their characters can just have such meaning that you cling on to ones.
So you mentioned a name that I'm familiar with, but it might be that our listeners are not. So Stan Lee, you said, is one of the people who signed your book. So if we're going to talk about Marvel Comics, would you like to tell us a little something about Stan the Man?
We have to talk about Stan the Man, Stan Lee, Excelsior. He wasn't the founder of Marvel, contrary to popular belief outside of the comic reader community. If you haven't heard of Stan Lee, if you've watched any Marvel film, you've probably seen as he plays a small cameo in every Marvel film. And he's basically someone who edited Marvel from the beginning of its Silver Age, when it started getting popular, right through the 80s, and he's essentially the face and the father. He's just the guy who you can go to and he'll be like, Excelsior. Very old now, 90-something, but, he co-created Spider-Man, co-created the Fantastic Four, co-created the Hulk, co-created Thor, co-created Iron Man, all these amazing characters that he had such a big hand in creating.
Yeah, I think you're right that most people, even if they don't know him exactly, they've probably seen him pop
at least,
in
even if they didn't know.
Yeah, they go, who's this old guy that just keeps showing up? Must be a famous actor. So you mentioned just before about the Silver Age, Golden Age, and different. Could you maybe just briefly explain what you mean when you refer to these different ages of comic books?
Well, we refer to comic books in different ages because comics changed not only style, but the way that they were printed and just the general feel of the stories. The earliest one, which we generally refer to, is the Golden Age, which started with Action Comics 1, which was the first appearance of Superman. People argue that there are ages before that, but there aren't really important ones. This ran all the way through to the 50s, and then in the 50s we began the Silver Age, which I personally feel is the best stage of comic books, because that's when we started getting all fantastic Marvel characters, like I listed off at the beginning. All of the name a Marvel character, chances are they first appeared in the Silver Age of comics, which ran up until about 1970. And 1970 was when we started getting all these Bronze Age characters. 1970 was the Bronze Age. 1970 to 1980, another 10 years of the Bronze Age. We started getting newer characters. Comic books started exploring slightly darker routes rather than just being fun all the time. We had Tony Stark's Demon in a Bottle, where it explored his alcohol, and comic books started exploring real life issues. And then after that, I think you've got the Copper Age, and then maybe a few others, and then you've got the Modern Age, which is what I still maintain that in about 10 years we're going to look back and go, actually the Silver Age was till 1980, and actually the Bronze Age was till 2010, but we don't know how comics are going to change in the future, so...
Yeah, it seems to be a little bit in flux at all times, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. But I still maintain, you might have heard a lot of bad things about modern Marvel comics, but Marvel is doing better now than it has done in years and years in Marvel. Just go and pick up a Marvel title, you won't regret it.
So if you were to make a recommendation, that's one of the things I quite often like to ask my guests. So you're saying go and pick something up. How would you recommend? You said before that it's quite difficult for people to get into reading comic books now. So if somebody's saying, well, I think it would be nice to read something, maybe just to read something in English, it'd be nice to read a comic book. I hear Marvel comics are good ones. What would you say? Get single issues, get a trade paperback? What would you recommend for a new comic book reader?
It like from the outside, it seems like comics are so hard to get into. But in many ways, I'd argue now that they're actually easier than ever, because everyone has a basic understanding of Iron Man is who Spider-Man is what his origin was. They know what the powers are. They know who the characters are. They know the basics. So I could argue that you could go and Jason, what's your favorite Marvel character?
Yeah. So I do quite like Spider-Man as well. That's definitely my son's favorite character. I don't want to say Spider-Man because you've said it, but I'm just trying to think of any of the collections of books that I have, and he's probably the most prominent character.
He's a fantastic character.
I think I'm going to have to lean on Spider-Man.
Okay, well, if we say Spider-Man, for example, if you just search in Amazon or Wordery or wherever you go, just search Spider-Man Volume 1. You'll get little trade paperbacks that collect 5 or 6 issues in one book. And any which says Volume 1, chances are you can pick up, start reading, and you'll understand what's happening, just because you have a basic understanding of that character. Sure, a couple of things might have happened that you think, okay, what's gone on here? But you'll still be able to appreciate the story for what it is. Well, yeah. Okay, admittedly, there are a few things in the Spider-Man ones, but for any Hulk issue 1, any Thor issue 1, any Iron Man issue 1, just pick up the trade. And on that first page, there'll be a little description giving you in about 2 paragraphs what you need to know. And if you already know the basics of the character, just go ahead and start reading. But my go-to universal recommendation is Secret Wars 1985. Just Google search Secret Wars 1985, get it on Amazon or something. That is a book which I don't think anyone doesn't enjoy, and it's just the most fun you can have in a Marvel book.
Is that where he got the black suit?
It is. That is the story where he got the black suit. He got that black suit in issue 8, part of a 13-issue story.
Technically, is that also the introduction of the character you dislike the most?
You got me there. You have got me there. It was the introduction of the Venom symbiote. Oh my goodness, the trailer's got me saying symbiote. Oh God, I'm ashamed of myself. It's pronounced symbiote. There we go. Correct myself there. Oh God.
Okay. So, sorry, I I got you there with that, but
You did.
no, but it's been interesting. It's interesting to hear someone who has a passion about these kind of things. So we don't want to dwell too much on the movies. Is there any interesting facts or interesting stories about Marvel as an organization or the comic book publishers that you think people would maybe not be aware of, but be quite interested to hear?
Well, I don't know if people are necessarily not aware of it, but the fact that Marvel essentially almost went broke in the late 90s and early 2000s, like a lot of other comic book industries, because they were printing too many books, because these comic book guy people sitting behind the counters suddenly saw that old comics started being worth money. So everyone was picking up 4 or 5 issues of every single book. But obviously they were keeping them clean and pristine because they were thinking, oh, these will put my kids to university and this will be fantastic. However, because everyone had them, that meant they weren't worth anything. And people started to realize this. So suddenly, these people only started buying 1 book of each instead of 5. And Marvel's sales, every comic book sales, cut down 80%. And this was a massive hit to the publishers because they were still printing this many, but they were selling a fifth as much. And this caused them to almost go bankrupt. They had to sell all their movie rights, which is why Fox had the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, all of their A-list characters. Sony had Spider-Man. They had to sell them all off just to even stay afloat, which is insane because, you know, MCU is the highest grossing franchise of all time at the moment. So it's really weird to think about stuff like that.
Yeah, I think when, especially when people know there's a link between Marvel and Disney, they probably assume, oh, they they've got a lot of money, and so it is interesting to know that at one point they were literally selling the furniture to pay the bills.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So what is it then about comics that you find so appealing? What draws you to them?
It's entertainment without limits, really. I think it's the nice medium ground between books and TV, because there's no budget for comic books, and you can see some truly amazing art in these books. It just makes your jaw drop, and they can draw whatever the hell they want, restricted by budget. And unlike like actual books, the writers and artists can put an image in your mind that you want to see. And I just find it's one of the most effective ways of storytelling, because you still get that bit of imagination about what the characters sound like, but then the writers and artists can really put forward to you, this is what I'm trying to describe. Here you go. And like, if you're someone who appreciates art, then every panel of a comic book page is art. People put so much time and work into those, and if they're done correctly, they're something that you can truly, truly appreciate.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you say. The kind of no budget, they can make anything as spectacular as they want, and you don't need to worry about how's it going to look at the final project, or will the CG be convincing enough.
It's just how well can you draw?
Yeah. So you mentioned it's sort of a nice medium between books and TV. How do you feel then about when they transition these things across into other mediums? So when you move a character that maybe you love and they put him now into a TV show, maybe it's a cartoon or a movie, do you feel a sense of ownership of the character, or you're just happy to see them portrayed on another medium, being let's say more accessible to other people?
I think is absolutely fantastic, because like you say, it's more accessible to other people, so more people are going to see this thing that I love and go back to the source material, and I'm going to get a new take on this thing that I love, and I'm going to get to experience twice as much of it. And even if it's not good, that doesn't mean that the thing I was originally reading isn't going to be good anymore. That's still just as amazing. So I think it's absolutely fantastic to try and sort of spread and share. And if anything, it just sort of shows that, yeah, what I like and what I love is really good, and more people want to make more of it.
So I'm guessing you're happy living at this period of time where...
Oh, I'm ecstatic about it.
Yeah, people actually
3
like
Marvel
them.
films a year, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's brilliant.
Probably remember the dark days of one movie coming out every now and again and it being pretty terrible.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And now we've just got the worst MCU films are pretty average at best, and that's just amazing.
Yeah. So there is only one part of this show that I could say happens every week, and that is when I hand over to you. So at this point, I've been asking most of the questions. But, topic's not going to change. We're going to keep talking about Marvel Comics, but I'm going to let you ask me the questions now.
Right. You're gonna have to give me a moment, because I knew you were going to ask this, but completely forgot. Okay? So I've already tried to ask you what your favorite characters are. So instead, I'm going to try and say, I'm from the way we've spoken, I'm assuming you've read quite a few comics then.
Yes.
Are there any stories which stand out in your mind?
So I'm gonna be honest.
Okay.
I read more DC than Marvel.
I guessed that. I did guess that.
But I thought it was quite interesting when Spider-Man first joined the Avengers. I thought that was interesting because it sort of took him from this street level, working alone character and put him into really the major leagues, the big team.
Yeah. From friendly neighborhood to, oh god, I've got to stop Galactus.
Yeah. So I thought that was quite interesting. I'm trying to think what other runs have been really stand out to me. I think one of the problems I've always found is that I maybe got oversaturated. So you'd read so much, and then it kind of all. I'd quite often find if I read an issue, I could not remember what happened the previous issue because I'd read other issues or other things in between.
Yeah, no, I completely understand what you mean.
Especially with certain characters that were being included maybe in two of their own books and 3 team books, and you're like, but wasn't he doing this last time? Oh no, that was the other book. And
well, Spider-Man springs to mind there immediately.
Yes.
I think he had about 4 ongoing series where he was the main point in the 80s.
Yeah.
So yeah, they really tried to get as much out of him as possible, I think.
So you had another question, but I interrupted you.
Oh no, it's absolutely fine. As someone who prefers DC, what do you think the best Marvel DC team up would be?
Ooh, interesting. Right, so I think. Well, what's the situation? Why am I calling them in? Because
who would you love to see work alongside each? Characters would you love to see them bounce off each other? Their dynamic, working together, or fighting each other even.
I'd like to see them team up. Do you know what I would like?
Yeah.
What I'd really like is maybe Batman and Captain America.
Okay.
Because I think they'd be the only two that wouldn't turn up and instantly start fighting each other.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
If anyone has read a comic book, they know whenever there's a team up, they meet, they misunderstand who each other are, they start fighting, then they team up to take down the bad guy. And I think with 2 level-headed people like Batman and Captain America, they'd meet, realize, something's going on, and they
just sort of
cut that middle bit out and just have a little chat, and then okay, let's get on with what needs to be done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the very first DC Marvel crossover was between Superman and Spider-Man in the 1980s, and you're right, they just met and started fighting each other for a bit, which confuses me massively because Superman would annihilate Spider-Man pretty much instantly. So I'm not quite sure how it lasted so long.
But I also think that would be out of character for each of them.
Yes, exactly.
Well. That's the problem. I find when you put them together, whatever they're normally like changes, and they just because I mean, even if they meet a villain, how many conversations has Superman had with Lex Luthor? Happy to stand there and have a chat. So,
but not if he meets Spider-Man. He's got to have a good old punch up first.
Yeah. Well, it's been very interesting having this little chat about Marvel Comics, and I'm hoping that some of our listeners are saying, you know what, I'm gonna look into this. The movies are very popular, and an interesting thing about them is the global reach that they have.
Yeah.
Interesting some of the little changes that you'll notice from one country to another, or with the or with the introduction of the movies, things have changed. Like Spider-Man. Now this might be wrong. I'm going to be corrected by my few Italian listeners, but I remember that the comic books they used to use the Italian name.
Really?
Yeah. So they would call him Uomo Ragno.
Uomo Ragno.
Yeah, which is man spider basically. And
there's a character called Man Spider in Marvel Comics, actually. I think so.
But in the movies, he's called Spider-Man.
Okay.
So they kind of changed it across.
Went straight back to it, yeah.
Yeah, because I always thought it was strange that they called him Uomo Ragno, but Batman was Batman, And he
Oh,
wasn't,
they didn't switch it for Batman?
No, he wasn't Uomo Pipistrello, which I think would have been a really nice name. But
that sounds really good in Italian. That is Italian, yeah?
that is Italian, yeah.
God, I need to...
Well, I'll let my listeners tell me if it is. It's been a couple of years since I've been back here. But, but it's nice. It's got this kind of global reach. But I do think it's another thing that if you're looking for tools to help you to get better at a language, comic books is a great one because it's very visual. So you can see what the person's doing. You can read the words, and even if you don't get all the words, you can, from context, maybe work out what's being said.
I think once you're comfortable with a language, that's the best way to take it to the next step. Like, test yourself.
Whether or not that language then serves you in your daily life is probably depending a lot on your hobbies and interests. But
well, you get a lot of alliteration words, or like just descriptions like Fantastic Four, Incredible Hulk, Invincible Iron Man, Amazing Spider-Man. Get a lot of those.
That's true, yeah. So it could serve someone in some purpose. We're not sure exactly what. Well, it's been lovely having you as a guest.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Would you be happy to come back another time if you have another topic that we can talk about?
I would be more than happy. In fact, I wish it.
Oh, good. So that's something for us all to look forward to. So we'd just like to wrap things up now at the end of the episode. So as we mentioned at the outset, you have your own podcast.
Yes, the Ranked List of Everything, which your host has been a guest on. Each episode we bring on a new guest and we add 3 entries to the Ranked List of Everything, where entries can be literally anything. It's about 18 entries. Got lots of things from Bovril to idiot cyclists to people wanting to become dictators, all the way up to Star Wars. So quite a range now. Yeah,
and it is a good show, so I recommend if you want something to listen to, definitely head over there. We'll put a link in the description of this episode.
Thank you very much.
If you'd like to get in contact with us, you can visit aconversationwithpod.com. And there you'll find links to our Twitter and Instagram, but it's at ACW Pod. You can email the show, aconversationwithpod@gmail.com. If you've got a topic you'd like to talk about, please let us know. We'd be happy to have as many listeners on as guests as we can. We've also set up now a Patreon, so if you're listening and thinking, the audio quality on here isn't the best, or you could have spent a minute or two more in the edit, well, if you want to help support the show, you can head across to Patreon at Conversation With. Again, links will be in the description, and you can throw some money towards this show to maybe bring the quality just up that little bit. So we'd like to thank our guest once again, and we'll say to all of you, see you next week. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.